Mr. Speaker, the Consumer Protection Act applies to unfair business practices if the supplier or consumer is a resident of Alberta. Northmont Resort Properties Limited is an Alberta-based and registered company dealing in resort timeshare with Alberta residents, with its head office in Calgary. In a February 7, 2018 letter to my constituent, an Assistant Deputy Minister concluded that the matters of concern to him and hundreds of other Alberta consumers were outside of the mandate and jurisdiction of Service Alberta's Consumer Investigation Unit. To the Minister of Service Alberta, what can I tell my constituent about your apparent lack of interest and failure to protect consumers?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, this is the first conversation that I've had with the honourable member with respect to this particular issue. I'd be happy to follow up with him on this specific issue and get him information, though he has not personally contacted me for information outside of question period. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This follows on many letters from my constituent. Given that the company referred sells timeshare lease contracts to Alberta residents, transactions are conducted in Alberta, sent to the consumer by supplier representatives in Alberta, with offer and acceptance also taking place in Alberta. And given that this would clearly indicate that the Alberta Consumer Protection Act should apply to these transactions, and given the company in question has allegedly engaged in unfair practices as defined in the Act. Again, to the Minister, how can you say that the consumer concerns expressed do not fall clearly within both your jurisdiction and your mandate?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we take consumer protection very seriously. That's why I've overhauled the prior Fair Trading Act to make it the Consumer Protection Act. Mr. Speaker, I've done a lot of work on this front, and the member is now putting words in my mouth that I never said. I think that that's very untoward behaviour, not appropriate for this House. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, I would appreciate it if the member is getting letters that he actually transmit them to my office so that I can help his constituents instead of using it for cheap political points.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Actually, many letters came from your office and many came to your office. Mr. Speaker, given the Consumer Protection Act would apply if a company was engaging in unfair practices, such as performing unilateral amendments to contracts without the approval of the Alberta consumers, or imposing cancellation provisions that were not in the original contracts. And given if the Alberta government has a law on its book to protect consumers from unfair practices, surely it also has a responsibility to enforce such laws. Again, to the Minister, what justification can you provide for not enforcing the Consumer Protection Act to actually protect Alberta consumers in this case?
Hear, hear.
Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've said, if there's information that the member has, I would be happy to look at it. Additionally, I'm not sure what he's talking about when he says that I have sent him letters, as I have done no such thing. However, Mr. Speaker, I do know some general details about the situation, and to my knowledge, this falls under BC jurisdiction. Again, if he has issues that he would like to bring to me to actually receive help instead of trying to achieve cheap political points, I would love to help his constituents. Thank you.